Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Audrey Lewis, Marketing Specialist at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. The slides and recording will be made available at the end of the session. This webinar is celebrating our brand new cookbook, The Joy of Data, which features over 15 customer data use case recipes and is available for download in the attachments section. We also have other related resources in the attachment section of the platform, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. We also want to hear your questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit any of your questions throughout the webinar. For any questions that we aren't able to answer live, we'll follow up with you after. Lastly, stay tuned until the end of the webinar to get an update on our Home Chef giveaway. Now on to today's speaker. James Burnham is a digital strategist here at Telium and has over 6 years of experience in account and platform management, infusing a strong technical skill set with effective interpersonal skills, campaign strategy, and online marketing best practices. And with that, let's get started. James, over to you.
Thanks, Audrey, and hello and welcome, everyone. As Audrey said, my name is James. I'm going to be walking through with you guys a few different use cases today, ones that I've personally helped set up and execute on. I'm going to do my best to go around with a bunch of different verticals with these different companies to make sure that we cover a lot of ground and we're able to kind of spread out what we're talking about. All right, I'm going to move the slide along here just to give us a general overview of the agenda. And yes, you're going to notice I'm going to use a bunch of cooking puns whenever I possibly can. I'll kind of go in and out, so don't get too excited. But the first part of this is going to be the 5 courses in the customer lifecycle. And yes, I say courses, and really what I mean are the stages of that lifecycle. With any good meal that you're making, you're going to want to be able to serve to the person's taste, right? You're going to want to know who you're serving for. And in a lot of folks' cases, they'll say, well, obviously, and especially for my clients, they're going to say, okay, well, that's my customer. I want to serve my customer. And while that's, of course, true, what we really want to do is get a little more granular than that and look at the stages of the life cycle that they're in and cater to that life cycle. So we're going to be taking a look at all the different stages, making sure that we understand each step within that. And then obviously from within those stages, we're going to be starting to be proactive about the high-risk customers to boil down the churn. This is where we're going to start talking about retention and everything that leads up to retention and what comes after retention, which i.e. is loyalty. And then increasing the engagement with customers most likely to purchase. That's obviously taking your top line and raising that line higher. And finally, with a little bit of time left over, we're going to talk about how to expand beyond that expansion and adoption and optimization, going further into essentially what is going to be the end game, the predictive insights, taking all of your current technology that's efficient and optimized, and then adding some machine learning to that to take it to the next level. So that's kind of the agenda here. But before we really get started all that, we got to understand our tools. Obviously, none of this is going to work without proper customer data, without a good base of data to work with. And then, of course, the actual manipulation of that data is going to happen inside your CDP, your customer data platform. And then finally, when we're able to, and again, this is more of the end game side of things, the predictive insights, the machine learning portion of this. But before we hop into the use cases or the stages themselves, I do want to give a little bit of an overview of what Telium does, of what the Customer Data Hub is really all about. I promise this will be super quick so we can hop into the fun stuff. But if you direct your attention over to the left side here, you can see kind of the real starting point of what we're talking about. This is data ingestion. This is where is that data coming from and what kind of data is it? You've got your mobile app data. You've got your CRM data, maybe you use Salesforce or something like that. Transactional e-commerce data. This is your POS systems in your brick and mortar stores. This is your potentially your data houses somewhere online after your e-commerce data passes through. And then finally, your data from CSV files and API integrations, which is really a catch-all. This can come from anything that can send an API or pass along info and through a CSV file. This could be data lakes, warehouses, everything in between. What we do is we take that data, we normalize it and standardize it, basically making it speak all the same language, converting it all to that same format. And then we use it to create a single customer view. And this is more in our audience stream product, but that single customer view is essentially building a profile about the clients that you have. we're allowing all of these events coming through to be assigned to a specific profile. So whenever you reference that event, it's already attached to a person, and you can also reference all the other data that that person is associated with. This is extremely powerful, and it's pretty much what makes all the rest of these use cases that we're going to talk about work, is the idea of the single view of the customer, a singular profile that you can always reference. Finally, we're taking that single view and we're activating the data. We're creating segments and audiences and allowing that data to flow through your third-party vendors, such as your display ad, your social ad, your email vendors, your media buying, on-site personalization, all that fun stuff where you can actually activate on these campaigns that you want to build. So in a nutshell, this is what our customer data hub is really doing, and it's going to be the fulcrum point of the rest of this presentation. So to understand the use cases moving forward, we have to understand the customer lifecycle. And yes, it is a 5-course meal, starting with awareness, which is pretty obvious. A lot of this is going to be obvious, and I'm not saying that this perfectly fits every single business out there, but some version of this, something similar to this, is going to apply to just about everybody. There is always going to be an awareness phase where people don't know about your brand, your product. And yes, this is more B2C, but it does work with B2B as well. Then after they figure out about your product, there's the consideration phase. What are they being held back by? What do they need to figure out before they go ahead and make a purchase or become a member or sign up in some way? The acceptance phase, when they've made that first purchase or signed up or done whatever the kind of end game is for you. And then the retention. And yes, I know this entire meeting is more about retention and loyalty, but retention doesn't work unless you have steps 1 through 3, right? So we're going to talk about everything in conjunction with each other. And then finally, advocacy and re-engagement. That's where do we go from after they've purchased and we've kept them along? How do we get them back into that consideration to be either a repeat customer or a re-engager or something like that? And yes, it kind of does that loop around. So we're continuously creating this life cycle as we move forward. Awesome. So from here, we have a really good base of what does Telium do? What are the life cycle stages, and what we're going to focus on. I'm going to go through 5 use cases right now that I've created, and these have actually been implemented with customers and pushed forward and seen results. I'm unfortunately not allowed to say their names as far as the actual companies, but I'll give you an idea of what the vertical is, and you can get more detail about how it works for them. But the cool part of this is each use case is going to reflect one of these steps. So we're going to go through it one by one. There'll be awareness, consideration, acceptance, retention, and advocacy. Without any further ado, first use case here is actually with a very well-known restaurant chain across the entire US. And really what we're doing here is boosting top of funnel. The recipe or use case name is creating VIP seed audiences for lookalikes and similar audiences. Obviously, this seems very straightforward, right? Everybody who has used marketing operations or been in that space has probably used lookalikes or some form of it. The real power here of what we're able to do with Telium is how are we creating those seed audiences to base your lookalikes off. And for anybody who isn't aware, lookalikes and similar audiences are done by Google and Facebook. Essentially, they allow you to add a seed group of your customers and then send that to their system. There's an algorithm that they use to find other folks that are similar to those folks. So they look through a host of different attributes and decide, okay, these people kind of look like the people that you showed here, so we'll give you that audience and then you can show them a display ad or a social ad. And what we're doing here is really focusing in very specifically on what is the kind of audience that you're building and who makes that audience up. That's where audience stream comes in. So when we have these profiles, I can start to work with my clients, in this case, the restaurant, to figure out what is your ideal customer? What really signifies the best of your customers and who do you want to get more of, essentially? So we look through a host of different attributes, right? So we look through lifetime order value and the real reason for all this, right, is that COVID hit last year. And their brick and mortar stores had to take a dive. Obviously, everything shut down, and they needed a digital footprint fast. And where before their simple name recognition was able to bring customers in from off the street who just saw them, now they are having to pivot and get online ordering set up very quickly, which they did not have. So they didn't have a lot of these audiences and normal marketing setups really flushed out yet. So we kind of pivoted and started to look at what is your ideal customer. And at first we looked at lifetime order value, and we set a number to that. Then we said total number of orders in the last 3 months. Then we set a number to that. And we had a whole bunch of different attributes that we were playing around with and trying to figure out. And obviously the first try, we got some folks as far as the lookalikes on it. It didn't really convert as well as we were hoping. The second try was a little bit better. The third try, and this was something that we kept optimizing. And over the course of about 3 weeks, we honed in on exactly what attributes we wanted, and we started to see some serious returns on really what those lookalikes were coming in from the top of the funnel and starting to bolster that online ordering revenue. It was a lot of fun. Honestly, this one was more of a trial and error type than a lot of our typical, or my typical use cases would be. I like to fuel it more with data, but we were kind of starting from scratch here just due to their normal business cycle. So it was really interesting. All right, let's hop on here to the consideration. Take a drink of water, hang on. Okay, so highly engaged user conversion. Now, this one is a very well-known sports organization, sports team, and they were having, not trouble, but they wanted to bolster their single ticket and season ticket purchases for the games that they had coming up in the season. They had been doing very, very well on the merch side of things, but the actual ticket purchases had been waning a little bit, so we started to focus on some use cases to try and bolster that. And there was a number of different ways that we could do things, but the real interesting thing about this particular use case is that we had very limited information about the actual visitors to the website. For any of these teams in this league, there were not really a way to sign up and become a member with the site. Anytime you would go to purchase, and this is true of pretty much every national sports team in the US, you would actually be transferred off to Ticketmaster or a similar site to purchase the ticket there, where you would enter your email and name and all that. And Ticketmaster would have your information, and then they would send it back to the team, but it would be very, very difficult to match that information up with the person who was browsing on their website before they went to Ticketmaster. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We wanted to present something more interesting to our clients, but we didn't have a way of gathering enough information to reach out to them outside of the website. So we didn't. We decided to stick to the website. We had a lot of behavioral information about what the people were looking at, the kind of content, the kind of things they were doing on the website. We just didn't really know who they were. But with that information, and we could take something as simple as the device ID, notice that the computer that the person is coming on identifies them, and then say, okay, that person is interested in this particular team or is looking at this particular game schedule and always looks at this particular matchup, that kind of thing. We started to build out some affinities. And the first thing that we did, and the most effective thing in the end, was we were real prescriptive about bringing the single game and season ticket button more into line with what the person who was visiting the website was seeing. So, for example, if we noticed that somebody always visited the game schedule to check on the next game or a particular matchup that we saw an affinity towards, we would bring the single ticket purchase of that particular game right below the schedule for it, or right below the actual line where it said that game's schedule in terms of that time and kick start off and all that. So what we ended up doing was bringing those buttons forward, making that much more accessible, and that by itself, without a lot of other work, brought single game ticket purchases up. The revenue there increased almost immediately. We're able to do similar things with affinities around the website, with season tickets for folks who were constantly looking at the record of the team over the course of a lot of time. A couple of different merch options we were able to bring forward in the particular roster, folks. So if people would look at the roster and check out certain players, we could bring up their jerseys right next to them and do some stuff there. There was a lot of different things here, but this is kind of that consideration phase where they're already looking at all the stuff on the website. They're already considering things and understanding the brand, but they aren't taking the next step. And whether that was just about not being interested in it or not being accessed or not knowing about it, we were able to bring that and make it much more simple and accessible and pull some stuff off there. Real cool. All right, so another new vertical. This one was, if you think of a website like Reddit, it's a very similar setup, similar company to that. kind of like blogs and forums, lots of articles with different kinds of content. There is no real profit being made here. This is more about just garnering engagement. Our use cases were similar, simply to help them get customers engaged, and using this as my acceptance stage, which is kind of interesting because what they're trying to do for their acceptance is really just get people to sign up for the site, get people to sign up, and then get the notifications and their emails, and then come back to the site on a regular basis due to them being signed up. So I gave you a little bit of background here, but the website layout is you come to the home page, you'll see a bunch of articles about different topics. Some of them are listed here: sports, vehicles, DIY, agriculture, that kind of stuff, but different topics with a whole bunch of different articles, and the user would be able to kind of scroll down, see if they're interested in anything, click on it, read it, engage more. And what they were seeing was a lot of folks were showing up to the website, taking a brief glance, maybe scrolling a tiny bit, we're able to track all that data, but then bouncing off the website. I would say that most users would do this 90% of the time. And what we noticed was that the other 10% of the time, the users would be clicking on one or two topics that were really, in this case, their interest. So they would get to the page and they'd only be interested in something like agriculture. They'd look at the top 5 articles, didn't see anything, and they'd leave. Next time they'd come back, nothing, leave. Next time they saw one, they'd read it, and then they'd leave. So we started to notice, like, hey, if they're just coming back for a particular type of thing, why don't we just make that easier for them? And yeah, we don't have their email yet because that's what we're trying to do, get them to sign up. But we can personalize the page. We can use display ads just based off of Google ID and other things like that. So why don't we make that easier on them and just show them the information? So we ended up personalizing based off of their behavior. So if they came and only ever looked at stuff about cars and vehicles, we created an audience called Vehicle Affinity. And anytime someone would join that audience, if they came back to the website, any vehicle articles would be brought up to the top with everything else below it. And if they left the website, we would have display ads through Google and Facebook show them ads for those vehicle topics and articles within those topics, the most highly rated articles and that kind of stuff. And this drove up the engagement. Eventually, folks would be like, okay, there's getting a lot of these articles that I'm interested in, and they would sign up. And we did see higher sign-up rates, which was really exciting to see and a really fun use case. All right, retention. This is kind of the name of the game here, so I put a good one for this one. This is a very, very well-known insurance company. And I'll kind of lay the scene before we get into the retention side of this. But the scene is they have a lot of customers. These are long-time customers in most cases. And they started noticing an influx of support calls. People calling in by telephone to their support centers, trying to figure out a host of different things. And the company itself started to get a little concerned because the support costs they were expending were extremely high. We're talking into the $500,000 up towards $1 million. And they wanted to reduce that by identifying what the issue was with their current customers to try and fix that, to increase their retention. Obviously, the support was with the higher support costs. They also noticed people churning, that customers would be leaving and losing their insurance with them. So this was partly about just giving the customers a better experience and partly about creating that sense of retention, trying to bring that back in and reduce the amount of churn. So we got together, one of my clients obviously, and we started to say, okay, what are the main issues here? What are the folks in your support center getting calls about? So we started listing them out, and the very first and most important one here that would seem to be causing the most issue was changing their payment method for that insurance, changing the way that they were paying for it. We started looking through the website, and even with ourselves, we started to notice that it was a little bit tricky to try and find the right answers to changing that payment method. And with a company like this, a company as large as this, it's very difficult to get creative and or web development to go in and change the layout of the website to fix a lot of things. So we tried to get a little bit creative with this and start to figure out a way that we could present to the customers who seemed like they were getting frustrated with the correct information. And what that means is we would essentially identify triggers for frustration, right? If somebody was browsing through websites and they had clicked something on changing payment method and it looks like they had stayed on a website for a few seconds, then switched to another website, then switched to another website, and very fast clicks, that was a trigger for frustration. If somebody had stayed on the changing payment method for too long, that was a trigger. There's a few different ones of these, but we started just playing around and see if we could use those triggers to personalize the mobile app, to personalize the website, to bring the kind of obvious answer that they're looking for in terms of changing payment, how it all works, how they do it, what they need to click on, forward, something like the fact sheet, bring that forward to them, personalize the site so that they would see it first and foremost as soon as we recognize they were getting a little bit bothered by the flow of everything going on. And this one is actually currently in production. We're figuring it out. It seems like we're already seeing some results here. We have some ability, and we really want to spread this one out. But this is kind of an example of not only the general idea of retention, but it goes beyond that. We're trying to reduce churn, we're trying to improve experience, and we're trying to promote advocacy. If somebody's able to not say anything bad about a company through their experience, of course they're going to advocate. So that's all part of it. And then finally, for re-engagement and advocacy, you probably guessed this is a cruise liner, cruise company. And we did a pretty fun one with this one. This was affinities timed interval targeting. So advocacy and re-engagement is really about taking your customers and trying to get repeat customers out of that, right? Or engage in whatever way that you consider the conversion point. So what we have here is, and this cruise liner is very well known, but it's also very long-lived. It's been around for a very long time, and a lot of their customers are of the older persuasion. We're talking seniors and senior travelers most of the time. So what was happening here is we would have folks who very often would be scheduling the same time of year, likely a birthday, or in some cases this was a work trip where smaller firms around the country would buy a cruise for their employees and take them all out once a year or once every few years, something like that. But there was a lot of repeat cruise purchases with a, I guess, theme is the way that you would put it, with a particular date or destination or from point or something that we were noticing. And this was actually on their team. They noticed this in their analytics, that they were seeing a lot of the same type of thing happens. Like somebody will purchase a particular cruise to Cuba every time it comes up, or somebody will purchase a particular any cruise at the same time every year. Somebody will always leave if the cruise is going from San Diego and it comes back 3 days later, something like that, right? There's always some sort of weird theme, not always, but with a lot of their customers. So we started to build out these affinities, and the affinities ranged, we tried to be really simple with it. Any sort of departure date that was consistent or happened more than twice, we would make an affinity for that. And whenever that date came up, we would present them with anything that's going on, just to make sure that they get their yearly cruise in, or departure location. Obviously, these things aren't infallible, so we wanted to make sure that if they have a theme they're trying to go for, they're presented with the right information in front of them to be able to make that happen whenever they want to. Because at the end, we are trying to make what the customer, no one's going to buy a cruise if they want a cruise, but if they do want one, we want to make it available for them to see it as quickly as possible and make that choice. So departure location, anything that come up and somebody was really interested every time there was a cruise from X location to X location, we would make an affinity group for that. And we ended up making a lot of audiences for this particular use case. I think it ended up being around 80 something. But all of those audiences had a particular affinity. And if somebody joined that audience, we would give them display ads. This company was actually very much into direct mail, so we would send them direct mail. We would personalize the website to bring that cruise forward whenever they were on it. A lot of different things. And obviously, we were able to play around with which kinds of cruises, if there was more than one in the category they're interested in. If they were a higher spender, we could give them the higher one. If they were lower, we would try and be more economical about it. We got to play around with a lot, and it was really interesting in terms of seeing how that panned out, and we did see some results come from it. Very, very fun. All right, so with all of those different stages kind of in the bag now, we've talked about the idea of the life cycle, and the life cycle obviously usually starts after, and this particular graph right here, sorry, is more about use of your tech stack. Obviously, this applies more directly to Telium, but it can really mean any sort of use of your tools. The implementation side aside, as soon as you're out of that and you're starting to adopt that tool, you need to use that MarTech to be able to influence those different stages of the life cycle. This is how you start to glean that retention. This is how you start to really gain that loyalty. If people are delighted and happy at every step along that customer life cycle, there's nothing bad they're ever going to be able to say. It's going to be essentially what you're hoping for in that case. And that's where these life cycle strategies and use cases come in. The adoption, the growth, and the optimization stages, followed by, and I do want to touch on this for a little bit, that expansion stage. How do you take everything that you've built so far, these really cool little use cases that we just talked about, and take that to the next level by adding in, rather than reacting to what your customers are doing, let's start predicting what they're doing. Let's start to understand what they're going to do before they do it, and then beat them to the punch by providing them exactly what they want. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. Telium has a product called Predict. And this is our machine learning solution. Essentially, and I'll give a brief overview of how it works for those of you who are not as familiar with ML. Essentially, what we do is we try and predict a particular thing to happen. So let's take purchasing X product. We want to see who amongst our database is going to purchase X product in the next 10 days. What we would do is we would create the model, and all you essentially are choosing is, what are you trying to predict? Purchase X product. How long forward are you predicting it within? 10 days. Then our system will look backwards at our database, our current database, and particularly look at folks who have already purchased that thing. So have whatever attribute that says they've already purchased X attribute. They'll take that whole group, and then they'll try and look at the attributes from within those folks. They'll correlate the attributes from within them to try and see which of those attributes seem to be correlative of also having that purchased X product. Which of those attributes match up between them to see, like, this seems to be somewhat indicative of, if they have this, they have also purchased X product. Once it builds that model and decides which of those attributes are what we're looking for, it will then apply that model to the rest of your database who hasn't purchased X product and give them a statistical likelihood to do that, something from 0 to 1. So if someone gets a 0.91, they're very, very likely to purchase it. If they get a 0.05, they'll almost never purchase it in terms of this model. Obviously, the more data you have to work with within your database, the more likely the model is going to be something extremely powerful. But we've seen already a lot of results from our clients using Predict. And the use case that I want to talk about today is with a very, very well-known technology company who started to use Predict in kind of a different way. They have a setup where part of their website is devoted to developers. And these developers can come and sign up and use this program in which they could kind of co-create software with my client and release it into a particular marketplace where they're able to pick things up and play with them, and also get a share of if there's any sort of monetary compensation that goes in with that. So the interesting part of this was they had an enormous customer base. They're very well known, but they didn't know who to market to that was a developer to see who was going to go and fill out this form and be a part of this program. So what we ended up doing was we already had a high number of developers who had signed up just organically and looked at things. We took the folks, and this is kind of like running a seed audience against your own list with your own tools. But we took the folks who had already signed up for that form that were developers. We looked at the attributes inside of them and then tried to predict the rest against the rest of the list. How many of these folks match up to the folks who have already figured out that they want to be a part of this program? And then whoever got above, essentially, I think we looked at, obviously it was from 0 to 1. So everyone who was above 60 or 0.6, we decided to run some ads against and see who would sign up. We ended up bumping that to 0.75 after a little bit, just because the numbers were so high, that an enormous list. And we actually started to see some results. We saw results start to come in for folks hitting these forms, and essentially we didn't know they were developers, but either they were or decided to become, based off of this predictive analysis of matching up attributes and checking things out. So it was a really cool strategy that we're able to kind of bring up by using, like I said, it's kind of like a marketing practice against yourself in some degrees. So that was really fun. And that kind of wraps up the use cases that I want to talk about today. Really appreciate all of you guys coming along and listening. We have a few more slides here, but beforehand, I do want to open it up and see if there's any questions to begin with. So if anybody wants to throw anything, I believe there's some functionality right there on the BrightTalk where you can add in some questions if you'd like. Okay, I see one here. What are other examples of actions that predict and calculate the likelihood of? That's a great question. There's a number of ways that you can predict whatever it is you want, but the two biggest things that you're going to be looking for are the likelihood for somebody to return to your brand, to re-engage with your product, and then the likelihood to do X thing. So the X thing one is the big one. That's purchasing and revisiting and all that kind of stuff. But it's really about attributes that you have in your system. So the reason that these are separated out in this way is that with predict, you can decide to predict any attribute that has essentially a true or false value. We use badges as well, but anything that has an on or off switch. And you can try and predict if that attribute is going to become on. So we can predict as granular as somebody joining a particular audience. So if we have an audience that is VIP, whatever, and we're trying to predict who's going to become a VIP in the next 10 days, we can say, okay, use that badge that is the VIP badge, and then predict who all is going to get it in the next 10 days based off of that model. So that's part of it, and we can do that with literally any on-off attribute in your system. Then the other part of it is who is going to revisit, who is going to come back to the brand within a certain amount of time. And this becomes more useful for particularly dated, not dated, but date locale marketing campaigns where you have something like Black Friday coming up or Christmas coming up or something like that, where you want to see how many folks are going to come in the next week before Christmas. Then you can throw ads to them to say, okay, here's the promotions coming up, and make sure you come back on those days. Let's take a look here. Got one more. On the topic of retention, what is your advice for re-engaging stalled opportunities? Another great question. I guess this one is really what we've been talking about this whole time. You can't say, and I'll be the first to say, I have a lot of clients. I get to run renewals with them sometimes. And if I ever come out and say like, hey, let's get a meeting on the books to talk renewals, I'll get some responses, but it's not as many as you'd really like. So what ends up happening, and this might seem subversive, but it's not, because I want to do both of these things. I'll usually end up putting meetings for opportunities with them or use cases that we can build out with them. And how this would translate more to the B2C side is, in terms of getting retention with your clients, it's going to be more about what can you provide that's going to make them want to stay. What can you do for them that makes them not? Nobody has to purchase into a certain brand. Nobody has to stay a loyal customer of a certain company, but you need to make them want to. And these different use cases that we've talked about are all fueling that intention. It's making their experience better. It's making the things that they want more accessible to them. It's fueling your ability to help them more. And got one last question here. Is the presentation you're reading off of available as a download? I believe so, yes. We are going to make the deck available with the Joy of Data cookbook deal afterwards. So keep an eye out for that directly after this. All right, a few last slides here to finish up. Okay, so right here, we do have some more attachments. You should see it right here on your BrightTalk screen on the side there. There's a few links that you can click to check out more data. We have a ton more use cases, a ton more information and articles, really great stuff. Please check it out. We put a lot of effort into kind of providing some stuff for you. We also have another additional webinar coming up here towards the end of the month. Going to be with me again, so if you're sick of me, don't worry about it. I'm just kidding. Please come and check it out. It's actually me and one of my clients, Thrive, and one of the guys that work there who I work very closely with. Extremely smart and funny guy, so it's going to be a great meeting. And finally, don't forget to check your email. The winners of the Home Chef giveaway will be notified by email tomorrow, Friday the 5th. So that should be coming through. I've used Home Chef before. It's definitely worth it. So check your email. And lastly, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I've done one or two of these before, but this one is kind of a little bit more near and dear to my heart, particularly. I always really like talking use cases and bragging a little bit about how cool my clients are. But other than that, it's been great. So thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.